Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2025 fantasy horror Dracula, A Love Tale. The film is directed by Luc Besson and it stars Caleb Landry Jones as Count Vlad. We have Christoph Waltz, we have Zoe Blur, and Ewan's Abid. Right. Okay, this is the retelling of the classic Bram Stoker's Dracula. We meet Vlad, played by Caleb Landry Jones. He is a feared warrior in his land of Romania. He is deeply in love with his wife, Elizabetha. He's a prince. He heads out to war, brutally slays his enemies, and his wife is ambushed by his enemies and killed, and he can't stop them in time. He then renounces the church and essentially becomes the undead. He becomes Dracula, Count Dracula. And for the next 400 years, he is searching endlessly for his love, Elizabetha, who he strongly believes will be reincarnated. He has been looking and has so far unsuccessfully found her until he is visited by Jonathan, who has come to see Dracula, and essentially he discovers after looking at a locket, Count Dracula, that his fiancée, Jonathan's fiancée, is basically Elizabetha. He then wants to become young again, heads off in order to try and sweep her off her feet. But there are plans afoot as there are people who are aware of who he is, where he is, and what they need to do to stop him. Right, what are my thoughts on Dracula, A Love Tale? Oh, this one is quite difficult in many ways because on the surface of it's a really established film. It's got Luc Besson, obviously a very talented director. It's got a beautiful look about it, the film. You know, the set designs, the costume designs, you know, the sound design. A lot of it is very pretty and is very nice to look at, and you know, a lot of effort has been put in here, there, and everywhere. And then there's another side of it where it's basically go and watch the Gary Oldman version. It's better. It's better than this. I don't understand why they keep trying to recreate something that has been done so well previously. Now, I'm not saying there should never be a Dracula film before, but I think when they've nailed it so well, you know, the Bram Stoker Dracula that Francis Ford Coppola and, you know, Keanu Reeves and Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins all took part in, I think is the definitive version of that novel. Might not be exactly like the novel, but I think it's the definitive version. It's a stunning film to look at and it's brilliantly made. This just feels like a satire of it at times. I don't have a problem with any of the cast in this film. However, Caleb Landry Jones, who plays Vlad here, when you see him first time at the castle in the get-up that looks just pretty much like Gary Oldman when he was the elderly Dracula, Vlad, and then he starts talking, you're just thinking, well, he's just trying to do an impression of Gary Oldman. And he's not, but that's what it feels like. It feels like they're trying to impersonate what Gary Oldman has done before. And it's quite jarring and it's a bit disconcerting and it deviates your attention away from the film. For me, I don't feel as though they have given themselves anything like their own identity here. It just feels like a rehashing of what has come before. And not in a good way. It doesn't feel original, and it's not original because obviously it's based on the novel. But you know, it doesn't stand on its own 2 feet. I don't think as like an original piece of work. I think the casting here is wrong. Like I say, I think Caleb Landry Jones has not really been given much help here to kind of make the part his own. I don't think he's a bad actor by any stretch of the imagination. I just don't feel he's been helped with the material here. Christoph Waltz, one of the finest actors on the planet, in what essentially is a very held back and reserved performance, almost a boring performance as the priest, essentially Van Helsing, as the vampire hunter. But they do it from a more scientific perspective than the Anthony Hopkins version, which was just delightfully over the top. So I mean, he gave it its own identity, Hopkins. So those that follow, they don't have an awful lot left to do with the character other than what they did with the Hugh Jackman film, because it was so creative, that version. So you find yourself watching this constantly comparing the films because it doesn't do enough to stop you making those comparisons. Not as far as I'm concerned, anyway. And, you know, it focuses very, very, obviously, I mean, it's called Dracula, a Love Tale. It focuses very, very heavily on the love story between him and Elizabetha, which is fine because I didn't actually mind the beginning of the film, the start of the film. I was quite taken aback with it. I thought it was... They established, I suppose you could say, the love between the two characters, maybe arguably better than the Francis Ford Coppola version. But that's probably the only area where they did expand on it and do something different. So I was on board initially for this film, and it was heartbreaking to see Vlad constantly trying to commit suicide because he's lost without her, jumping off his ledge in his castle, constantly trying to commit suicide unsuccessfully. And I thought that was, you know, I was on board because I'm thinking like, yeah, okay, they are doing this a little bit different. I really do feel his heartbreak and loss. And then, like I say, when Jonathan Harker turns up, played by Ewan's Abed, it just reverts back to what you know. And from that point on, it just becomes that movie. And then there's other odd choices. There's these weird gargoyles in his castle that serve him. That was a bit odd. And other bits and pieces throughout the film that I don't know. Even though he was, you know, Dracula, you know, this feared, you know, vampire, master of vampires, you never really felt his ferociousness. You know, the level of his power, the level of his evil, or anything like that. You know, there's just a scene at the end where he tears some, you know, some soldiers apart. And even then, it doesn't really feel like he's doing that with his vampire powers. It feels like he's doing that based on what he used to do when he was a soldier sort of thing, years ago when he was the prince. So I don't know, I just think this is a misguided attempt at giving us something we've had before and had better. And it at times it almost felt like it was satiring what we've had before, you know, the Gary Oldman version. And it just, for me, didn't do enough different here to make this story interesting, to make it compelling, to make it watchable, to make it feel like it's its own piece of material. And I think, and I keep reverting back to it, I think the Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Gary Oldman version, did that. It took what it needed from the book, and then what it put in there as creative license, it did so magnificently. It just all seemed seamless. And this, it doesn't. It doesn't feel like that at all. I think this is a missed opportunity, a little bit of an oddity, you know, especially after we've had Nosferatu as well, which in itself is based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, albeit, you know, in a different way. At least they've done it in a different way. It's the same story, but done from a different way. This isn't. So, yeah, that's enough from me on this one. I wasn't overly impressed, but I'm giving it the score I've given it because of the production values, you know, the artistic creativity that's gone into it, you know, the talent in front and behind the camera all do a decent job. It's just what they've been given to do didn't, you know, do enough as far as I'm concerned. So that's my thoughts on Dracula: A Love Tale. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen the film, and I will of course be back with plenty more reviews and content on the channel very, very soon.